except it's different. I wouldn't overdo the comparison to the 1970s. We have unique problems, mainly because our inflation is coming from the supply side, not the demand side. So global recession underway, will get worse before it gets better. An environment where inflation is not yet under control and interest rates are going up. So pretty bad scenario all around. No, I think the bottom's already in. I think it was in last week. Gold hit $1,700 per ounce. That was the closing price on COMEX. It was a little bit lower intraday. I think it might have ticked down to 1689 or so on an intraday basis. That looked like the bottom at the time. I said so at the time. An interim bottom, obviously it's volatile. It was 1,050 on December 16, 2015. So 7 years ago, it was almost half what it is, or sorry, just over half of what it is today. So, but I think that looks like the bottom. It will go up from here. It's already at over $1,800 an ounce, so it's up, about 5% or more just in a matter of days. Well, here's what I say, going back to the $5,000 prediction. Actually, I believe it'll go to $15,000 an ounce, and that's not a wild guess. There's a lot of mathematics behind it, having to do with, if you ask yourself a question, what is the implied non-deflationary price of gold in a gold standard? That's a serious question. And you have to fill in some variables. You say, well, okay, how much gold do I have? What's my money supply? What percentage gold backing do I think I need to have a successful gold standard? And then just divide one by the other and come out with a price. That number is over $15,000 an ounce. The reason I say over, it's a moving target because they keep printing more money. The more the amount, at least for the United States, the amount of gold we have is fixed. It doesn't have to be, but it is. And the money printing keeps going up. So the number is a moving target, but $15,000 is a good approximation. So yeah, on an intermediate term basis, if you want to say $5,000. But I remind people, if it's at 1,700 today, or 1,800 today, and it's on its way to 5,000, it's got to get to 3,000 first. In other words, are you really complaining if it goes to 3,000? I expect it'll go to 5, but it's got to get to 2 before it gets to 3, and it's got to get to 3 before it gets to 5. So if you don't want to wait around till it goes higher, there are substantial gains to be had at those levels. Well, the supply chain has very serious problems, and there is a very serious global food shortage, getting worse, possibly leading to mass starvation by the fall. But you only hear that from the mainstream media in a context of telling you how bad Russia is. They leave out the fact that the U.S. provoked the war, the U.S. wanted the war, Ukraine wanted the war. Did Russia invade? Yes, they did. But they warned us in 2008. They invaded Georgia in 2008. They took Crimea in 2014. They massed troops beginning in 2021. And they said, if you try to join NATO, we'll basically come in and assert our rights and liberate the Russian-speaking peoples and republics in the eastern part of Ukraine. So how much more warning do you need? And the U.S. either ignored it, which is possible because we have highly incompetent policymakers, or they wanted it, which is also possible. And I think that actually is may be the case. Either way, Russia is keeping that territory. You could have had. I've never seen a war that was easier to prevent. All Ukraine had to do was say, okay, we'll remain neutral, we'll be a buffer state. We're maybe we'll join the EU, but we're not going to join NATO. And we're not going to lean east or west. We'll just be a classic buffer state. Nothing new about that in terms of international politics. But that wasn't good enough for Zelensky, who's just another crooked oligarch. Ukraine's the most corrupt country in Europe, and living up to that reputation. Now, as far as food is concerned, Russia and Ukraine together export 25% of the world's exports of wheat, 35% of the world's exports of barley, and a lot of other important foodstuffs, sunflower seeds. It's a very important source of vegetable oil and other agricultural crops. Now, it doesn't mean they produce 25% of the world's wheat. I mean, the US and Australia, Canada, and others have a larger wheat production, but we use it ourselves. In the United States, most of Much of the corn we grow, for example, isn't consumed by humans. We feed it to pigs or make ethanol. So, yeah, the U.S. has larger total output in terms of wheat and corn, but we use it ourselves. We don't export that much relative to Russia and Ukraine, which export a lot. And then you look at the other side of that and say, okay, those two countries are exporting 25% of the world's exports, but who imports it? Who takes the Ukrainian and the Russian wheat? And there, what you discover is that the countries that do get up to 100% of their food from Russia or Ukraine. And in many cases, 70% or more. So Jordan's 100%, Lebanon's 100%, Egypt is 70%, Kenya, Somalia, Sudan, others between 50 and 70%. And they're cut off. And you say, well, go buy it somewhere else. There is nowhere else. Countries are all around the world, Indonesia, India, and others are now hoarding their resources. India said we're not exporting any energy. Indonesia said we're not exporting any coal. They reversed that, but they had that on for a time. India's cutting out wheat imports and so forth. So you go around the world and countries are in effect hoarding what they have so they can feed their own people, which is understandable. So this Russia-Ukraine prohibition on exports, prohibition on exports from Russia, and de facto prohibition from Ukraine because it's a war zone, will cause mass starvation around the world. Now, that's a fact. You can pick that up in the mainstream media, but it's usually a function of, this proves how bad Russia is. Well, Russia is partly to blame, but so is Ukraine, so is the United States. So are a lot of factors. Again, this is a war that never should have happened. So that much of it is real. The anything about the war is almost 100% lies. Churchill said, in war, the truth is so important, it needs to be protected by a bodyguard of lies. Great quote, probably true. I'm sure the Russians are lying, and I know the Ukrainians are lying, but the Ukrainian effort, aided by the United States and the UK, and I have to say UK has been worse than anyone, as warmongers, it's very hard to find out what's going on. You can do it, but you really have to dig into sourcing. I found some good sources from the Swiss former UN Swiss military who became UN peacekeepers and were stationed in Ukraine on the ground. Agence France Presse has some good coverage. There are a couple of websites, but you really have to look around for it. Don't rely on the New York Times. I guess that's my advice.